The impact knocked me out for a brief moment, and as soon as I was able to open my eyes, I saw glass everywhere. I started hearing an unbearable ring in my ears and tried to protect them with my hands, but it didn't seem to get better. I slowly regained my hearing, and the sound of cultists screaming and gunshots were getting closer. I looked around, panicked, and realized the truck had went halfway through the gate, but the rear still seemed to be blocked in it. Accelerating didn't seem to work, and sweat started flowing down my forehead. I managed to shift the gear into reverse, and the truck moved back for a few meters, when I suddenly heard the noise of my side window shattering and felt an odd pressure in my left arm. An arrow coming from one of the cultists' crossbows went through the glass and right into my arm. I let go a scream of pain and used my right hand to change the gears. I stomped on the acceleration one more time and the truck went through the gate without getting stuck. I started shaking, knowing how close I was to finalizing my escape, and I concentrated on keeping my foot glued to the acceleration and steering with my unharmed hand. I kept shifting the gears chaotically, which made the truck let out an entire series of weird noises, but my only goal was to get as far away from the compound as possible. The road leading to the complex was a poorly maintained dirt road, which went through a dense forest. I continued following the road, constantly looking in what was left of the rearview mirrors to make sure I wasn't being followed. After what seemed like 15 minutes of dodging trees on the side of the road, I could finally see an intersection in the distance. The dirt road eventually ended, and I finally found a proper asphalt road. I waited for a moment in the intersection with no idea in my mind on where I could go, but I couldn't find any road signs, so I randomly decided to turn left. I followed the road for a few kilometers until I finally saw a road sign. A city called Arviana was less than half an hour away. I was confused, as I hadn't expected a cult compound to be as far away from home as it was. My hometown was at the northern limit of my country, and I somehow ended up in the southern extremity, which was at least an 8-hour drive. Being a decently large city, I was convinced that I would find some sort of help there. As the shock was slowly going away, I could feel the blood slowly dripping on my left arm, and the arrow was still stuck in it. The bleeding didn't seem to be very serious, since the window absorbed most of the shock and the arrow wasn't stuck very deep. Still, the sight of both fresh and dried blood all over my robes convinced me to not move my foot from the gas pedal, even though the truck was too damaged to even go over the speed limit. The 30-minute drive to Arviana seemed an endless cycle of narrowly avoiding crashes and looking behind to make sure I wasn't followed. Every car that would drive behind me for a while before overtaking me would make my heart explode in my chest. I let go a sigh of relief when I finally started seeing tall buildings and apartment blocks in the distance. I followed the signs that pointed towards the city center, and after going through about 10 intersections, I finally spotted a sign that indicated the way to the main police station. I noticed the building from a distance, as it was almost identical to the department in my hometown, and I swerved the truck into the parking lot, leaving it parked sideways. A few policemen who were smoking in front of the building were alerted and started running towards the truck with their hands on their holsters. I kicked open the truck's door without bothering to shut down the engine and almost collapsed out of the vehicle. "What the hell are you doing? You almost crashed into 3 cruisers," I heard a policeman shout from the other side of the truck as he was running towards me. "I think it's another drunk driver. Look at how this thing looks like," he continued, probably to his colleagues. One of the policemen finally managed to go around the truck and see me holding my knees with my hands, barely standing by the truck door. He suddenly stopped in his tracks, and so did his colleagues once they caught up. "Oh, shit. Get an ambulance, now," one of the cops said after staring at me for a moment, visibly shocked. No ambulance. It's not that bad. Get someone here to patch me up. I need to talk to you guys, I said, gasping. We can't just let you walk in like that. You're bleeding, for God's sake. I spent weeks, maybe months, in that hellhole, and I'm not gonna wait for your ambulance. You either let me in and let me start talking, or I'll be on my way until I find someone who does, I replied loudly in a sudden fit of anger. The cops stood silent and stared at each other for a few seconds until one of them nodded and one started approaching me. He grabbed me by my right side and helped me climb the stairs to the entrance, while some of the others were shouting around for someone to go and get the medical box. We entered the station and went through a small lobby until one of the cops opened the door to a smaller room on the right side. One of the policemen helped me inside and had me sit on a chair behind a table. The room looked like a typical interrogation room that I would see in the movies, but instead of having a single policeman inside, the entire group that had seen me outside was there. Another man rushed inside the room with a large medical kit in his hand, which he threw near the chair I was sitting in. The others were standing quietly as the man used a large scissors to cut my robe around the area the arrow hit me. He opened the box and took out some medical supplies to treat the wound. The man poured water on the wound and proceeded to disinfect the area around it. He then poured whatever disinfectant he had left on a strip of bandage. The arrow didn't go very deep. I'm going to have to take it out when you... Just do it already, I shouted impatiently. The man swiftly pulled the arrow out of my arm and I hit the metal table violently with my fist in pain. The bleeding intensified instantly, but he immediately covered the wound with the bandages, wrapping an entire roll of them around my arm. The pain was still intense, but bearable. Thanks. This is temporary. You're going to need serious stitches with that one, he replied, staring with a concerned gaze at my bandages. I nodded approvingly and turned my head towards the other cops who had been looking silently until that point. One of them, probably higher ranked, signaled the others to leave the room and they obliged. How did you make it out of there? You're the first one who escaped in years. No one's made it out since they built that wall. The remaining policeman finally broke the ice after the others left the room. Luck. I gained their trust and managed to get to that truck. I rammed it through their gate. I barely even made it out. Yes, that explains the truck. Looks like they weren't happy about you leaving, he continued, pointing towards the bloody arrow that had been thrown on the floor. They kill everyone who tries to escape. Are you not aware of that? Why aren't you doing anything about it? I started shouting in anger after realizing the police wasn't at all oblivious about the cult. Calm down, will you? It's not that simple. We can't just do whatever we want here. There are rules, and to hell with your rules and your higher-ups. There are people, kids even, people like me or even younger, who get tortured, killed, or used for slave labor in there. I continued my fit, interrupting the officer. Look, I get it. You have all the reasons to be angry, but the situation is not as simple as it looks like, I'm afraid. I guess it's starting to become obvious what they're doing with the millions they have stashed in their vault. You guys must be on their payroll, I said, sighing in disappointment. Are you going to listen for once before throwing accusations at us? You said you wanted to talk, he shouted, startling me. I remained silent as the policeman was standing in front of me, pressing his hands against the table. He cleared his throat and explained that the cult compound was built on a peninsula that formed after a major earthquake caused a giant hill to collapse into the river more than 30 years before. The river in question was the border between my country and our neighbors, who had been engaging in some sort of cold war with us for as long as I could remember. My country claimed the newly formed land as it was connected to it, but the neighbors protested, claiming that our military would use it to set up a surveillance area and move weapons there, since it was the closest point to their shore. What does any of this have to do with a cult, though? I asked, confused. Neither of the two countries could claim that piece of land without the other reacting in force. We had to make some sort of deal with our neighbors. What kind of deal? The peninsula doesn't exist, officially. It doesn't appear on any maps, not even in the satellite pictures you see on the internet. For anyone who isn't directly concerned, that piece of land isn't there. I'm not even allowed to tell you this, he continued with a frown on his face. Is no one concerned with what's going on in there? No one in his right mind from the brass would authorize a raid. Even if we were to do it off the books, our neighbors would see it as an act of war. No official agency can even step in there. I'm sorry. You're telling me the cultists can do whatever they want in there? Our laws, hell, even international laws, they can't be applied in a place that doesn't exist. I opened my mouth to ask more questions, but the words didn't come out. Every hope I had created about what I would do after escaping came crashing down in an instant. I couldn't help but feel that my efforts to resist in the compound were in vain. The police turned out to be of no real help, and the officer in front of me could only shrug and repeat how he wished that they could do more about the cult. He tried to comfort me by letting me know that the police was still doing its best to crack down on the cult's operations outside our compound, but eventually had to admit that they were underfunded and lacked the personnel needed to deal any serious damage to them. I stared at my feet, hopeless, no longer able to listen to the explanations and convenient excuses the officer would repeat over and over again. It was at that point that I realized how alone I truly was. My only remaining family member was probably going to try to find me and torture, if not even kill me, and I had just unloaded an entire magazine of bullets in the chest of my only close friend. Still, one of the answers the cop gave me was intriguing. If the law really didn't apply for the cult, that meant it wouldn't apply for anyone else. The wheels started turning inside my head, and it was clear that the authorities couldn't do anything else than shrug and put the blame on someone else. The cult was untouchable, unless a group of concerned citizens decided to say otherwise. I got up from the chair, letting out a quiet moan as the pain kicked in again. I felt one of my pockets was full, and I put my hand in it to investigate, and suddenly remembered I grabbed some cash from one of the safes moments before escaping. "Hey, where do you think you're going?" the officer asked me as I started walking towards the door. "Home. I've got things to do." "Is there a used car dealership around here somewhere?" I replied calmly. "You can't just go like that. You need to go to the hospital. Treat that wound of yours." "Trust me, this is nothing compared to what the cultists did to me while I was in there. I can handle myself," I replied and opened the door, heading back towards the lobby. "Wait! Fine, you can go. But on one condition. This conversation never happened. I'm not authorized to tell you such details about the cult. We don't want this information going public. It's gonna be a shit show for the government if everyone finds out what's going on. I don't want anything bad happening to you." The officer spoke, and I could tell he was somewhat anxious by the stare in his eyes. "Should I take that as a threat, officer?" "No. Look, between you and me, I wouldn't mind if someone were to show up at their doorstep with a machine gun and fill them all with lead, but we both know that's not going to happen. All I'm saying is that there's people who wouldn't take it nicely if you were to, speak out." "Alright then. You can rest assured that the public won't find out about the cult, unless, of course, someone decides to show up with a machine gun and fill them all with lead," I replied, smirking. The officer burst into laughter and let me know that I could go. I started going through the lobby towards the exit when the officer rushed towards me. "Oh, I almost forgot. There's a used car dealership 2 streets away from here. Just make a right at the end of the street and you'll see it in the distance." "Why did you ask, anyways?" "Well, I need to go back home somehow," I replied as I was opening the main door. He stared at me skeptically for a moment, but then decided to just wave goodbye to me and turn back towards the inside of the building.